Hello, everyone. This is Ellen Taverna. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited for our Friday update. Today is May 1st, and we have Kathleen Amaral, who's with us today. She's from the ARC of Massachusetts. And as you guys know, I know you're familiar with the ARC, but just go through our spiel that we're an umbrella organization with 17 chapter affiliates. And our mission is to enhance the lives of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, including autism and their families. So today, this is our agenda today. So we've got Kathleen Amaral, as I mentioned. Sorry, let me go back. She's going to be providing some state and federal education policy updates. She's been working hard on this for the ARC. And I'm also going to go over some of the recent advocacy that we've been doing for the next COVID-19 relief package. And some other Massachusetts and federal policy updates. So I don't imagine it's going to be a very long session today. I think, we'll probably end a little early unless we have some questions and we want to go over a few things. But it's a little shorter agenda, I think. So we'll have Kathleen start off with her education update. Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. First, if I could just make sure that you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you. Sorry. So that's okay. That's all right. It's the state we're in, right?
Yeah, right.
So some updates. It's in the Commonwealth. It's been a work in progress. We're all living this. Last Friday, one of the biggest updates really was that last Friday, Governor Baker announced the public and private schools, not including residential schools, will stay closed through the end of the school year. Those parents like myself, that was unexpected, although very emotional punch to my gut. Understanding, the needs of our children, right? So Desi described it as, their thinking around this was clearly the state we're in and the health and the wellness of students, but also there was in the decision making, the governor said that, it was really that he felt that schools were building momentum with remote learning, and that disrupting that may even be detrimental in addition to health and wellness of students at this time. And so we, reflecting back, we know Desi's guidance shifted quite a bit since the closure of schools. And the commissioner recently described the process that they're going through in phases. And so I don't really want to reiterate all of what has been happening, but to summarize it, the commissioner brought some clarity around like phase 1, which was the week 1. If you remember, we weren't really sure the extent that students with disabilities fit into any of this planning. The ARC of Massachusetts, along with other state organizations, put forth a really valiant advocacy effort around assuring students with disabilities were really part of being supported during this time. That first week, the commissioner mentioned the focus really was, this was a global pandemic. They prioritized needs such as like the safety and food, the food crisis, right? They really started off that first week in a tailspin, looking to support the health and wellness of students and staff. And then they talked about, moving to phase 2, which was week 2. Every week there's something new. And if you remember, this was before we really knew that I think what we knew at that point was May 4th was the date that we hoped that our sons and daughters would be, in our lives would be back to some sort of, it was a stretch, but it was a hope, right? And the Department of Ed released some initial guidance around remote learning, and that began to evolve really quickly. And so last week was that phase 3, where that's when Governor Baker last Friday announced the closure for the year. There were some significant updates around new remote learning guidance. At this point, we also, remember now our students should be receiving a FAPE, right? Our students are entitled with disabilities are entitled to free and appropriate public education. So those remote learning plans from the quote beginning or middle or still evolving beginnings of April were supposed to be rolled out, right? So all of our students should have been our families should have been in contact with schools should have been in contact with families, and our children, our students should have begun some sort of semblance of what FAPE is going to look like currently, right? We're in a really difficult time where not all students can be supported in this way through distance learning, but everyone is just trying to do their best. So this new guidance, however, last week focused on new teaching. We learned that the new guidance was put forth to strengthen the remote learning, to offer opportunities for new teaching, and to streamline the most important standards. So the Department of Ed chose standards that would reflect a student's ability to move from grade to grade. And they picked those standards that they deemed most critical. So the standards aren't a replication of traditional standards, but they are a simplification, a streamlined, most critical is how they define it. And the and also working to really build a better collaboration and a plan around consistent supports at home. And then moving forward, the commissioner talks about like this next phase, phase 4, and planning over the next several months about when students and staff are going to re-enter schools. The department really recognizes that all students, including most importantly for us, our students with disabilities, are going to be at a disadvantage, but they are hoping to work together to make it as less of an issue as it can be during this time. When the commissioner mentioned that in thinking about, and I know a lot of families, especially families of students with some significant challenges at home with this remote learning, are looking to a hopeful, safe, reentry at some point after this school year, whether that means in the summer or next fall. But the department is looking to ideas such as thermometer checks, face masks, staggering schedules, the distancing 6 feet apart, and so on. And so, of course, in concert with new advisory from the governor is what, they'll be waiting for any green light to but making a plan in the interim. And then there was the commissioner, an update I could say is that they're very invested in meeting with stakeholders. So next week, the Department of Ed is convening a large group again to really dig deeper and to talk more about some of the areas that aren't clarified yet regarding timelines and transition for transition age students. It was nice to hear that the commissioner is talking, and Ellen will talk a little bit more about this, but he, in his latest address, really focused on making sure people were understanding the importance of completing the 2020 census because of the funding and the critical funding that schools and the community will be looking for. And of course, Ellen will speak more to that. One other update that has happened is that while the Department of Ed put forth a temporary waiver for MCAS, the legislation, waived MCAS for the end of the year. And so what that brought about was the Department of Ed having to work to talk about waiving some competency determination for students graduating, not only from grade to grade, but more specifically around graduation after in high school, and this is obviously caused a lot of disruption in this area. So what they have done is that they know that these students who were on a path to obtaining their diploma, and this is really a small amount of students statewide. He reported about less than 1,000 students really meet this criteria, because only a small percentage of students with disabilities pass in this traditional way. But because there's no way to know who would have passed because the MCAS is waived, that they are looking to do other things to inform whether or not a student is ready to graduate with that diploma. And of course, those students who were planning to receive services from the Department of Ed until age 22, this does not impact. But there's a review of a transcript for those students who were really looking to redo that last test for competency. They will have the opportunity to have their transcript revisited and locally determined through their high school whether or not that student is ready to actually receive that diploma. So it is encouraging for that small group of students who were working so hard all of their academic career with the difficulties their disability may have presented. Ultimately now there is a chance that they still will be deemed eligible for that diploma. So then moving on to federal. So in federal news, Betsy DeVos did not call for waivers to IDEA. And in her response to that, we were all waiting on this response, and we were fingers crossed, toes crossed that she would not call for waivers and potentially roll back all of the movement that we've had over the last 40-something years for students with disabilities to have the opportunity to be educated alongside their peers. So she mentioned that learning must continue during this time, and that it needs to be based on what's best for students. So that's great news. And there's some fallout around that. I think that schools, feel the pressure around not providing or this, regression and families sort of fearing the need to access compensatory services. And so that's just something that's going to have to be visited once the time comes. I mean, we're going to have to take, my philosophy has been just try to work with what is best for your children, reach out to the schools and get something in place and revisit that. All students are going to regress, and it's really important that we just try our best, all of us, teachers, parents, students, just try our best, and whatever that looks like. And sometimes best is just not focusing on it for a little bit, and we just have to be good to ourselves. The next piece of federal news that Ellen will really speak to this in a more global way, but there is funding coming through, two streams of funding in terms of education, impacting education, and federal money will come down through the CARES Act. And so regarding education, there's the Emergency Education Relief Fund and the K-12 Stabilization Fund. And right now the department is applying for those funds, and pretty broad what those funds can be used for. They basically will be able to be accessed for a couple of years and used to any purpose related to ESSA. That's Every Student Succeeds Act. And it would include any federally related initiatives such as IDEA or Perkins and so on. And the meaning behind that and what the department is hoping is that this funding will support districts in supporting students to continue services during this unprecedented time. And so the only thing I will say in closing is that there are some things left to figure out. There are some concerns. There are lots of concerns, of course, but specifically thinking about early intervention and students turning 3. I know there was a meeting this morning that I was not on, so I apologize if there's been some movement, but the latest that I understand is that next week that stakeholder collaborative meeting will discuss a lot of these unanswered questions. But it's important that there are lots of people doing things to work through these issues. MAC has a survey, the Federation for Children with Special Needs has a survey, the ARC of Massachusetts, we're here in Advocacy, and Carrie may be able to speak more on this, but we'll be convening some focus groups, most specifically for under 22 for the most behaviorally challenged students, and a focus group for parents to kind of work through some of the issues and the concerns in that area. So with that, I think that's all. I know that's a lot. Oh, I wanted also to mention that I've heard from people concerned about tuition for those students in out-of-district placements. But I just want to let everyone know that the guidance through the Department of Ed has been that if special education services are being provided, districts should be paying for them. And so the tuition payments based upon the Operational Services Division rates, they are eligible for reimbursement through the stabilization fund. So students who are in out-of-district placement should be receiving services from that placement. They know your students best. They have been working with your students, and they should be continued to be paid at this time. So that's my update, Ellen.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive. Thank you so much. You've been working so hard on this, and you have like a million hats. Kathleen is actually on a school committee for her district. She like runs CPAC, and she along with like the 5 other jobs that she does. So thank you, Kathleen, for everything that you do.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna open it up for questions for you right now, and then we can, do it again at the end. I have one question from Giassi that says, "What makes remote learning more challenging for disabled students?"
Oh, thank you for that question. For my answer, I'm gonna speak about my family specifically. My son, he is not really engaged with the computer screen, and he benefits most from personal contact, and he is able to best communicate his wants and needs in a vast way. So he's not able to articulate what he wants verbally, but he uses gestures and some sign language. And so it's that body language and that eye contact that he really relies on to ask his questions and to share what he's thinking or what he knows. And so for me, I feel that while it's very difficult for him to access what's going on the screen, I equally, on the other hand, will say, however, that hearing his teachers' voices and seeing them, if he even peeks over to the screen, has been beneficial, because I think it's reminding him of the routine. But for learning, it's been difficult through that screen, because you can't really the emotion and other nuanced ways in which he engages has been difficult for him.
Thanks for explaining that, because I would have made the assumption that in essence remote learning might be an advantage for disabled students because you have more time for one-on-one. But thanks for explaining the nuance of not having personal contact with the teacher. It's like I can see that. I understand better. Thank you.
You are right, though. I mean, there are students who are better engaged for those reasons. So it might be a lesson that's been recorded that somebody can revisit a few more times, rather than in a classroom having to raise their hand a 3rd or 4th time and feeling a certain way about that. Yeah, I would agree with you that there would be instances, and I'm sure there are instances where it's that this different approach is more beneficial for some students. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I've heard that from some of my teacher friends, that they've heard more from their students. I'm not speaking of typical or non-typical, but that they've heard more, just from messaging, and they don't necessarily speak up in class, but she's gotten emails or, through whatever mechanism they have to do the remote learning, she's hearing from those students. So I think it may help some students, for sure. It depends on the student. I know at least for my son, who's autistic, he has trouble doing things independently. I can't just ask, him to go on to the computer program and do it himself. I need to be there to assist him. I need to be there when he's in a group setting for his class. So I think it's really different for every student, certainly. There's a few other comments. The registration for the focus groups that Kathleen mentioned earlier will be out today. So please, everyone, look out for that. And then we have another question from Tanya. Kathleen, did I understand correctly that school districts are reimbursed by the government for out-of-district placement funding?
Mm-hmm. So, yep. So if special education services are being provided, like I said, the district should be paying for them, and that tuition payments that are based upon the rates that OSD, which is the Operational Services Division, they are eligible for circuit breaker reimbursement. So yes, through the K-12 Education Stabilization Fund, which is part of that pocket of its $214.9 million.
Okay, great.
And
Thank
that was a clarification. Oh, you're welcome. That was a clarification just for specific, to specify through the March 27th update from the commissioner. But it was something that was unclear because it was sort of stated, but then not revisited. So it was recently clarified.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, Kathleen. I'm going to take over, and then if there's additional questions at the end, we can address them then. That works. So I wanted to go over, the status right now for the COVID-19 fourth COVID-19 package, or now they're calling CARES Act 2. So as we mentioned last week, the House is expected to do the first draft of the bill, but unfortunately, while the Senate will be back in session next week on May 4th, the House is not returning due to the recommendations of what's currently happening within DC, Washington DC. It was recommended for them not to come back. Not sure why McConnell decided that the Senate was permitted to come back, but so it's really important that we keep up our advocacy and reaching out to members of Congress. While they're still not technically in session, they're taking calls and they're responding to emails and letters. So we need to keep up our great advocacy. I wanted to just highlight, there was a letter that was led by Senator Warren, and can everyone hear me okay? Okay, I just want to make sure. So that was sent to House and Senate leadership about the critical needs of people with disabilities, the fourth COVID-19 package. And many of the things that were included were stuff that we've been asking for from the very beginning, which includes funding for Medicaid grant program to support access to home and community-based services and to support the direct support professional workforce, personal protective equipment and supplies for direct support professionals, and then also the paid leave for caregivers. So as we've mentioned several times before, our family caregivers are scrambling to support people with disabilities and their families, and while parent caregivers have been given paid leave, it doesn't apply to all family caregivers, and so that's something that we're asking for, in addition to people with disabilities being able to take the paid leave as well. Things were included in Senator Warren's letter, and so we're really grateful for her leadership. And those are just a few. There's many other things that they did include. However, we've been asking on the state level for additional asks, which I'll have highlight in the next slide. But I want to let you know that the ARC of Massachusetts, the Greater Boston chapter of the United Spinal Association, and the Boston Center for Independent Living, along with 13 other groups, the Massachusetts delegation in the Senate and the House, this morning. And we asked for removing, so this is in addition to, so we're tacking it on to the letter that was sent on April 29th by Senator Warren. So these are additional asks that we've asked for. And this, again, the strategy is that we're working this both on the state and federal level, and we're hoping that our congressional Massachusetts delegation in Congress will be helping us at the state level to push this. So we just want to make sure we're covering both bases. And so we sent this today asking to remove restrictive language in the Medicaid statute to allow legally responsible family members to be PCAs. So this will allow spouses, parents of minors, and legal guardians of adults to provide needed PCA services. And we know that, we're having a huge problem with having enough support staff in the homes. And so we want to make it easier for spouses and other parents of minors to be able to become PCAs, to do PCA services. And so our other ask would be providing a pilot program with funding in the stimulus 4 package to allow implementation of states of personal assistance based on the state plan option. In addition to that, so this was not included in Senator Warren's letter, and we just want to make sure that it's still a priority. It's a priority of the ARC of US and priority of the ARC of Massachusetts. We've been hearing from many families about this issue on dependence, whether a family member claims an adult or either their child or another adult with disabilities who are claimed as dependents. They're not currently under the CARES Act, they're not receiving that $500 of economic credit. We think it's a loophole in the system, and we've been reaching out to the Massachusetts delegation about this, and I've had calls with Markey's office and Kennedy. There's a few representatives that have already signed on to this bill that's currently there. So we just wanted to remind them of this issue because it wasn't in Senator Warren's letter on April 29th, and we just want to make sure that that's still something that they're thinking about for the 4th stimulus package. And we have our letter up on our website. But again, I just want to clarify that this was, we sent it with 15 other Massachusetts disability groups. And we think it's a really important issue, but it may be that'll be done at the state level. At least for the first two, for the PCA issues, for the all dependent children involved at the federal level. So sorry if that's confusing, but let me know if you have any questions on that. And then I wanted to let everyone know that we've been mentioning for weeks that the ARC of US has this We Are Essential campaign. We've been sharing our stories, want to make sure the disability community is represented in any federal action that's taking around the coronavirus. And so they've developed a new story collection tool, and it makes it really easy to collect and share stories with Congress. And it's sort of like a Mad Lib type setup where you're inserting different things, and it personalizes it because you don't always want to be sending the same stuff to the congressional office, as you want to make it as personal as possible. So they've developed this tool to help with that. So it's really exciting, and we hope everybody uses it with their future advocacy. And along with that, there's still the action alerts that are available on their website. So next up, I just wanted to let everyone know about some Massachusetts advocacy that's going on. And again, Maura covers this every Thursday very well. And so I don't want to, repeat what Maura says, but we just want to remind people of some advocacy that we're doing on the state level. There is an opportunity to do public comment to the Reopening Advisory Board for Massachusetts. This was announced on April 28th by Governor Baker. And so we wanted to just encourage everyone to submit comments if you're able about how the reopening could impact you and your family, and what are the priorities for you in making sure that we reopen as safe as possible. So that's just one opportunity we want to let you know about. And then we just want to thank everyone about all the incredible advocacy that you've done around the hazard pay issue. And if you're able and want to send a thank you to the governor, speaker, and Senate president for taking action on this issue. They've issued $44 million to community residential providers for essential DSP workers, for PPE and for infection control, and also alternative housing. And so this was a great success by our community. We had almost 6,000 letters that were sent to the governor and legislature. And so thank you so much for all the advocacy you've been doing on the state and federal level. This is really important to our organization. So we're really excited about this funding that's going to go towards DSPs. And so if you're able and you want to send a thank you, we encourage you to do that, because it's important to follow up. It's not, we're constantly asking the legislature and the governor and the administration to do things that they should be doing for our community, but we also want to make sure that we stop and thank them when they do good things. So we appreciate your help in this too. So next up, I just want to let people know that we're doing pretty well in Massachusetts for the census. Our self-response rate is 56.7%, which is above the national average of 54.6%. And again, we still have a long way to go. And as Kathleen mentioned before, this is so important for our schools and for our hospitals and for so many different parts of our society. And with all that's happened, we just want to make sure that Massachusetts is definitely getting the right count. We have, there's a Census Digital Action Weekend this weekend that's run by the Census Bureau. So it's going on today until May 3rd. And we're sending out a resource guide with all the different social media graphics and scripts and posts that you can use. And we just want to remind people that whatever we do, we want to also encourage you to use the hashtag Disability Counts 2020. So, we're, as other organizations help us with our social media days around the census, we want to help them. And so we're working directly with the Census Bureau to get the word out. But we also want to remember that we're representing the disability community. So just use that hashtag when you post about the census. And as always, the Arc of Mass is here as a resource, as a census questionnaire assistance center. So if you have any questions about it, please contact us. And that's it for me. Here's contact information for Kathleen if you have other additional questions, but I'll stop here. I went a little over, sorry about that. I thought we'd have a shorter day today. So I don't see any questions in the chat box, but you guys can unmute yourself if you'd like.
Just
All right.
thank you very much. Good job.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for joining us every Friday. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Okay.
Same to you.
You
Bye.
too.
Thank you.